Hello, it's Douglas Long and Sunny Navratnam again. And today we're having a look at the business world and the economic scenario that they're facing. I mean, tough economic times are here to stay, I think, for at least into the foreseeable future. We've had the global financial crisis. We've actually seemed to see recessions and stuff happening, a lot closer than they used to happen before that. And our guess is that we're going to see more of it in the coming times. Now, there's a number of strategies that businesses seem to take in dealing with tough economic times. And one of the ways a preferred way of dealing with that seems to be this savage process of cost cutting. And one of the most painful aspects of that is this mass sacking of people and downsizing, as they would call it. So I'm not really sure whether that is the appropriate way to work. What do you think, Douglas?
I guess my concern is corporate anorexia. And I think that it's a very real problem. We've got dieting fads all around about. You talk to almost anyone, and they'll be talking about the need to lose weight and the need to diet. And so you have all sorts of people out there coming up with new and wonderful diets, all of which have got their adherents. But what you find with most people is that they go on a diet because they consider themselves to be overweight, and then after a period the diet slips away, and then a little later they go on another diet, and so you get this cycle of dieting coming through and people trying new diets and different diets. And I think that the way in which we deal with downturns in the business world is much the same. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I was working on my PhD, I was looking at the whole issue of labour turnover in the Australian economy. And what my figures showed was that the cost of replacing staff in an organisation, in other words, that's a real turnover, is a person who leaves an organisation, but the intention is to immediately replace them. The cost of that is not less than 500 times the hourly rate paid. Now, they were my figures back 30 years ago. And later research has said that my figures are somewhat conservative. But even if we take that 500 times replacement, it's a huge cost to replace staff. And organisations seem to forget that yes, you may have a short-term gain by getting rid of a lot of staff now, but what happens to all the corporate knowledge? What happens when the economy starts turning and picking up again, as invariably it does, and you suddenly find that you haven't got the skilled workers? You don't have the people who understand all of what is going on and has gone before, and so you've got to bring in new people, you've got to train them, all of which is expensive, and of course lots of other organisations are wanting to do the same thing at the same time, so wages go up because there's a huge demand for a small pool of people, and so your costs start moving far more rapidly very often than you would really like them to, and so we then move up again and we go through the cycle. Now, I think organisations need to start thinking very carefully about how they can work with their people and how can they engage with the people. I'm not talking about lifetime employment. I'm not talking about saying you never sack people. I'm not saying that you never downsize. Of course you do. But I think you've got to be very careful about the difference between a reasonable weight loss, if you like, and moving to the point of anorexia. And I think too many organisations fail to make that distinction and suddenly find that what they thought was a reasonable weight loss has actually led to corporate anorexia.
I love that analogy, and I have a background training as an accountant, and I've always struggled with this because as an accountant we capture the information of what has happened, but what we capture is only one dimension of it. What we don't capture is what are the implications of that event. We capture the financial narrative of that event, but what we don't capture, what are the implications, what could happen in the future, etc., or what are the implications in the moment in the organization. And having worked with a large number of organizations at different times in my life, And having watched that kind of stuff happening, I do really endorse what you just said. In a few years ago, I built a business around finding all these people who had retired or had been retrenched, collecting their information and going back and selling it back to the same companies.
Yep.
Because they didn't have it. They didn't have the knowledge. The knowledge has disappeared with these people that they threw out.
Yep.
So, yes, this business of going, binge diet, which seems to be the way they're operating, doesn't make sense to me either. I think a little bit more thinking about that, sitting with the organization and saying, how do we sustain ourselves through this process? I'm drawn to other organizations which went through tough times recently, where I saw the organizations in back where I come from, for example, in Sri Lanka, where some of these organizations sat down together with all of their staff and said, how are we going to deal with this situation at the moment, because the harbors are not working, so we can't get our exports out, therefore the business is really suffering. And we saw everybody take a pay cut. Everybody's, rather than losing huge numbers of people and then retraining, and they said, let's all do this, let's all share the pain together and hold it together. Now that was, I saw the leaders. The leadership was phenomenal. Enormous courage, people who led from up front. And what they did was they sat and talked to people and mobilized the collective will of everyone to see prosperity contain and continue.
Yes, and that's happened in Australia. Back when I was doing my research, there was a company down in Melbourne that manufactured motor vehicle parts that was in danger of closing down, but the costs had got out of hand. And the CEO got together all the staff, union representatives, and it was strongly unionised, and simply said, here's all the facts. And together they worked out an approach that was very successful. It moved the company forward. It has happened in Australia. It can happen in Australia.
Yes. I think the other good example of that was the fellows who used to make the plastic, the Kodak, for the Kodak films. And one day they just, their whole business just evaporated in a matter of a couple of years. But they sat with their staff and they pulled together and they ended up finding ways of using their existing equipment, machinery, etc., and producing a whole bunch of range of other products and stuff, which allowed the company to continue.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many other ways than the seemingly easy option, because the easy option is to take a hatchet and just go, okay, let me go and whack these people off. And sometimes when we whack people off, we might actually be cutting out our hearts. With
Today's solutions become tomorrow's problem.
So there's our conversation about this point, and perhaps if you got any thoughts about it, please add in your comments and share with us. Have you ever been part of this kind of process? Have you ever been in an organization where people have got together and managed to transition through really tough economic times without going through this savage process of taking people out of the workforce? So we invite you to participate and share your thoughts with us. Thank you.